Welcome to another Maine SBDC webinar. My name is Kelsey Reardon and I'm with the state office hosted by USM right in Portland. And today we have a really cool partnership. So we have Maine SBDC Business Advisor Ann Lancaster and have I already forgotten your last name? Dana Hall. That's right. My husband's last name. I forgot it. So we're all in good company today. We have a really cool focus on franchising and learning a little bit more about what franchising is, what it's not, what you are capable of, and probably many idiosyncrasies along the way. And this presentation is brought to us by FRANNET. So they are a really cool organization that helps franchises. And so Dana's gonna lead us through most of this presentation. If you're not familiar with the Maine SBDC, we are the Small Business Development Centers, and we are here to help with just about any small business need you could have. If we can't answer your questions, we can certainly find somebody who can. We can't give accounting or legal advice, but we can connect you with a group of accountants or lawyers who could help you along the way. All of our advising is no cost to you and confidential. So you're safe to come in with fun ideas, scary problems, whatever you may be facing, we are happy to help. And so I'm sure that many people have questions about franchising. And so this is a cool opportunity. We are recording today's session, so if you need to leave early or you are like, wait, what did they just say? You'll be able to rewind that recording and double check any information you may have missed. The link to the recording as well as the presentation slides will go out in a follow-up email later today. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to respond to any of those emails and I can connect you with Dana or with Ann. But if you have questions right now, I'm going to ask you to use the chat feature below. We'll have a couple of times throughout the presentation where we'll have time for questions as well as Q&A at the end, as always. I think otherwise we're all set to get started. So I'm going to pass. Oh, I was going to let everyone know ahead of time, we will be doing a poll. So maybe we should launch that right now and then pass. I'll do my intro as people are getting started. So let's see if I can do this. Familiarity. All right, so you should have a poll up on your screen. So we're going to ask, what is your level of familiarity with franchising? I own several already. I have some experience. I'm starting from scratch, or what is a franchise? And then you may need to scroll down a little bit. The other question is, where are you in terms of business planning? So maybe you have an idea, maybe you have a business. We want to know. So the first option is I want to start a business, but don't know what type yet. I have an idea, but don't know where to start. I have a side hustle I'd like to make legal. I think I'm in business, but want to make sure I'm not missing anything. And lastly, I own a successful business and want to create a franchise. So go ahead and answer those questions just so we know who's in the room with us today. And in the meantime, I will pass it over to Ann to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kelsey. Today's session, there's a slide I think that has me on it, Dana, is that right? The next slide. Who am I? But there I am. Okay, maybe we should have reversed those. Anyways, so I'm a business advisor with the Maine SBDC. As Kelsey said, we're here for all small businesses, and all small businesses are in Maine, essentially. So we are resources, just like FRANNET is a resource for you. I'm going to be very brief so we can go back to the agenda for a second and talk about what we're going to cover in our time today, if you don't mind, Dana. So Dana is going to touch upon, business ownership, the positive and negatives, some common myths with franchising, some government regulations, the importance of personal goals, how to finance the business, and then available resources. So we're going to cover a lot of territory at the end. You know, in between, we will have questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. Okay. And you know how to get a hold of us. I'm sure all of you have registered with the Maine SBDC. So we can go to the next slide.
So I guess it's me.
It's you, Dana. Take it from here.
Thank you, ladies. I appreciate it. So folks, welcome. My name is Dana Hall. I am a franchise consultant with FRANNET for the Boston area, but also Maine and New Hampshire. Real quick, I have a pretty lengthy background in franchising on the corporate side. So I worked for a couple of major franchise multi-unit restaurant companies over my career. I have a background in finance. I actually did a stint as a franchise business consultant working directly with owners. So got a pretty good 360-degree view of franchising and what it is and what it isn't. And now what I do, these slides are not advancing as quick as I'd like. Here we go. So with FRANNET, what we do is assist people in finding the right franchise for them. So we're almost a 35-year-old franchise consulting firm now, one of the first, about 100 of us across the country in various markets. One of the things we're most proud of and we covet is the relationship we have with Ann and Kelsey and all of their peers at the Small Business Development Center. In addition to their sort of sister organization called SCORE, we really value these relationships we have with these folks. We're the only national broker that has those, so we're very proud of that. They do fantastic work, often for free, so they are a gem that people should know about, especially folks looking to be in business. And then we work with franchise companies on our side in terms of an inventory. We maintain real close relationship with the companies that we present to clients. And then we have some great partnerships with funding companies that helps you on that end. So again, real quick, we're not salespeople. We are not trying to jam anything down anybody's throat. We are literally consultants, almost like an attorney or a CPA that's going to provide guidance and expertise, but very specifically to help people figure out if they should own a business. If so, should it be in a franchise model? And if so, what ought it be? So that's our role. We're matchmakers. So let's get into it. A lot of this initially here for the next couple of minutes is just based on our experience, our background in doing this for hundreds of people over a number of years. So you might be asking yourself, why would I do this? Some of the obvious things, you got to make a living, right? But people come to us for all different reasons around why they're looking for a business. And ultimately, you've got to do a little bit of a self-evaluation, right? So what are your motives? What is your why? Is it just, hey, I've got laid off 4 times in 8 years. I've heard that story. I'm sick of doing that. I want more control because of that. Flexibility is I just had a gentleman this morning just talking about how he works so many hours. If I'm going to work that many hours at this point in my life, I want to do it for me, not for somebody else. So you hear that a lot. Independence, which is, a little bit of an offshoot of flexibility. I want to be my own boss and have that control. So there's a calculus here, right? Everybody's is different. So what you define as success is going to be a variety of probably these things and some combination of them. Some of the concerns we often hear, well, it's super risky, right? I've got a job, it's safe. Oftentimes that is true. But for that gentleman or those folks that got laid off quite a bit, we talk a lot about there's job security if you're in the corporate world like I was for 20 years, a W-2, right? A paycheck every week. But then there's income security, which everybody is looking for. So if you're somebody that doesn't have a safe job, but what you're really after is income security, potentially a business can offer that because you're in control of it. It costs a lot of money. We'll talk about that in the miss. Yes, no, maybe, right? There's a range. I don't know I wouldn't even know where to start. Well, hopefully, the three of us here are resources for that. Like, where do I start? There's ways for you to get help if you don't know where to start. And then we'll talk about the skill part later too. Oftentimes people don't realize that the skills that they've acquired, whether in their job or just their past, they could be a professor, whatever it is, a lot of skills that people have acquired are transferable to running a business. And we'll talk about what those are and how that relates. How does that transfer? So what are your options? Okay, here I am. I'm here today because I really want to learn about how do I get into business. And if you think about it, there's essentially three. You could start something from scratch. You could be the next Steve Jobs or whomever, right? I've got a great idea. I can buy an existing business, something that's resale, already is been operating. Or you can invest in a franchise model, which sometimes has a resale. Oftentimes it's starting from ground level. It's a new location, but you've got the backup or the background of a franchise. So let's talk about a few of these. Now, I won't belabor these slides too much, but things to consider, right? Part of the intro, part of the title, options and considerations, things to think about, right? Starting a business, what are the good and bad? You have all the control in the world. You get to make all the decisions. You're the boss. Great, typically for people that are creative. So they have a way of doing things in their own brain for everything. Their way of doing it. There's no rules because you're the boss. Largest upside, and it is something that, hey, I've always wanted to do that, or I'm passionate about this. I want to create a business out of that. The disadvantages, sometimes are the same things, frankly. I got to create all that, right? I've got to figure out how to operate it, how to fund it, how much insurance do I need? How do I do a website? There's lots of considerations for any business. So you got to create all those systems. The financial options for funding it are quite a bit less when you're just on your own. And I'll talk about that later. You got typically a slow ramp up because you're sort of maybe everybody's going to make mistakes. You're probably making the mistakes that a franchisor has made over the years in a franchise concept that they've got that refined, right? If you're doing it on your own, you're going to stub your toe here and there, and it takes a little longer, and you have to learn from that. And there is a somewhat higher failure rate with sort of a one-off mom and pop startup from your own. What if I bought an existing business? Lots of advantages here. A lot of them more practical ones. It's got, hopefully, if it's a good business, cash flow, goodwill with customers and employees. You're going to have actual financial results, right? Profit and loss statements, tax returns. It is attractive to lenders because of those two reasons, right? So they will lend to something that they know and can see and can evaluate. There should be a market established with customers, maybe even some employees that will come with the business if you were to buy it. Hopefully, the owner has documented a lot of what he or she does, so the system's in place for you to follow. And sometimes you can even get that owner to finance part of it. So almost like a transition where they stay on for a period of time and you pay them, and then you transition slowly out of it. The disadvantages, again, some of these are similar. If it's not a great business, maybe it isn't profitable. How do I evaluate if there is a good market for it? Is it got a good reputation? The Google reviews and the Yelp and all that sort of thing. Is there bad will? What kind of training are you going to get from that seller? The two biggest ones, honestly, are how do I know what to pay for it? That's difficult. Most of us are just lay people. We're not CPAs, so that's one where you're going to really want to have professional help. What do I pay for this? It's not like a refrigerator or a car where you can sort of compare and do some research. There are some very top line benchmarks around that I won't get into here about how you would get a ballpark for it. And the other one is it's going to cost you more. This is something that's existing. Somebody's selling it. They're selling it hopefully because they're retiring or they had to move, that sort of thing. But they're looking to make a profit off of what they built. So it's going to cost the seller, more than if you put the sweat equity in and built it yourself. And that hidden seller motive is another big one. Know why they're doing it. Why are they selling? Is there something wrong with this business? No, it's great. I just don't want to do it anymore. Yeah, have the antenna up. And then finally, investing in purchasing and being a franchisee, investing in franchise models. So advantages, there should be a lot of intellectual property in terms of, marks and license trademarks, websites, color schemes, all that. All that stuff should be in place with a mature, good quality franchisor. The reason you're buying this is because it's got a proven business system. So they've replicated it already. You can demonstrate success. They ought to have really solid, ongoing, deep training for you as an owner. I want to teach you how to do this. Relatively speaking, it will cost lower because what I talked before about making mistakes. I purchased a 2-year contract for this when I didn't really need it. Oops, I overpaid for the equipment because I really didn't know what that kind of equipment costs, depending on what the kind of business is. So it ought to have lower costs because all that's been refined. There's good financing options. Again, because most of these companies are recognized. The Small Business Administration oftentimes knows exactly the company and will readily lend. Disclosure is a whole section we'll talk about that you have access to with franchising. And there's a family around this, right? There's the franchisor that hopefully has your best interest in mind. The good ones do. And then you have fellow franchisees, peers, right, that you can draw on. And you become somewhat of a business family. I won't go too far with the cliche that you're all going to be buddies and all that, but you have a family of people you can draw on. I apologize. I have to plug in my computer. I should have done that at the outset.
That's all right. We always say technology is great when it works. So I'll just, because I didn't get a chance to say out loud, we do have some familiarity with franchises based on our poll. And it does seem like we have the full spectrum of a business idea, but not really where not started anywhere to having a very successful business and is looking to create a franchise. So we have an interesting group today.
Excellent. So on the disadvantage side, there isn't a franchise for everything. They have typically by nature, by the fact of what a franchise is, they're very structured. So they want you to follow a system that they've created. There's a range to that. Some are, more strict than others. I always love I'm not picking on Subway, but if you want to talk about a super structured, that's the one that just stands out, right? The planograms, you come in, they audit you, operational audit. If the pickles are in the wrong place, they're not happy, right? There's a whole way to do it, and they want you to do it their way. So for that creative person back in the 2 slides ago, where that's a good option for somebody creating their own business, if you're creative, the Subway end of the spectrum is probably not for you. But there are franchisors that are far more flexible around you being able to put your stamp on it. Territory, that's good and bad. You are protected oftentimes with a particular location with a radius around it, or if you own zip codes. That's a good thing to some. You could view that as limiting as well. So that could be a disadvantage depending on your perspective around it. You can only sell their products. That's kind of obvious, but sometimes there's things that people do on the side that you say, oh, this would work great in my location. They typically frown on that. And then for all of this, as a franchise, you're going to pay to them an ongoing royalty. You don't get something for nothing, right? So they're going to take a portion of your sales as their payment. That's how they make money. That can be viewed as a disadvantage depending on your perspective. So some pros and cons on all three, and just some things to consider.
And I would say that as business advisors, we see all of these scenarios and work with clients that just starting up, thinking of owning their own, or they want to buy a business. The franchise, we don't see as many, which is why I wanted to do this webinar, because I'm very curious about who's interested in this model as an option. So anyways, okay, Dana.
Yeah, thank you. And it's good to know that that there is a range of folks that come to you, for support. So what is a franchise? I mean, that seems, I think everybody has their, view about what it is. But in this context, it's not like, Star Wars is a franchise, right? Movies and, all sorts of toys and everything. But very specifically for our purposes, it's very simply a license that you're going to be provided to a franchisor, from a franchisor to you, to use their all of their name, trademark systems in exchange for that initial franchise fee. That's an upfront fee that you will pay, and ongoing royalties. And that's really what a franchise is. You are becoming a licensee, somebody that can represent and operate a location or a series of locations for that parent company. And real quick, the reason they're doing it is a couple reasons. One, they want to expand and grow. You could do that two ways as a company. You can open your own locations and own them all, or you could get local people, expertise in certain areas. What happens in Kentucky doesn't happen in Maine, right? And so having people that understand that live there, that's attractive to franchise companies. And the other part of it is, frankly, they're growing with your money, right? So it's the franchisee's investment, not the company's. So that's a little bit on that. So I talk fast. Were there any initial questions that I can help with?
Not yet so far, but if anybody has any, go ahead and plug those in the chat and we'll definitely get to them.
All right, I shall soldier on. So let's talk a little bit about, the landscape of franchise. I always feel this is interesting, just so people get a sense of, they see the things that we see driving around Domino's, McDonald's, right? But what is the broader view of franchising? So in the United States, roughly 8.5 million workers work for a franchise company. It's an $800 billion industry, across all the 3,500 franchise brands that exist in the U.S. And that represents 3% of the entire economy as defined by gross domestic product. So 3% doesn't sound like a lot. It's a pretty big chunk. It's a very huge industry. So what is the impact in Maine, more specifically? Let's talk about what we really care about where we live, right? So in Maine, again, going back to the 30s, there are literally 3,500, give or take, franchised concepts in this country, not locations, like individual different brands, which is staggering to me. 5 years doing this, I still like, wow, so that many? There really are. And in Maine, there's 272 of those 3,500 operate in the state of Maine. So these are, Dunkin' down to things you probably may not even ever have heard. 1,400 locations or territories in the state of Maine. So not insignificant. Again, the ones we're going to show you in a minute that you see driving around, but what you'll see is that's only a small portion. And there's 860 some odd folks in the state of Maine that are franchise owners. So again, pretty big business community of franchisees. The impact financially, over 25,000 workers at the end of 21. I know these are funky years to be comparing, right? Pandemic years, but these are just straight numbers, right? That's up from, even still during a pandemic, 21, we were still, pretty thickly in it. Good growth, almost 8% in the number of workers in franchising from 20. And it's going to grow again this year. It's projected about 3%. So employment is growing in franchising, and just pure economic output, almost 2.4 billion in the state of Maine alone, generated by franchise businesses in 21. That's up over 15% from 20, and the IFA projects just shy of 5% growth in those businesses this year, by the end of this year. So again, just a frame of reference.
Mm-hmm.
And yes.
Question from Michelle. Dana, that was, what's the difference between a franchise and an authorized dealership?
Awesome question. So it's in the legalese more than anything. It's how the agreements are written. I'm not an attorney, but I would tell you practically the difference is a licensee typically. I just had one up in Maine. I have a house I'm in Maine right now. I needed a gutter. I needed gutters put on my house. So a company called Gutter Shutter out of Wells, Maine, came out, installed gutters. They are a dealer, a licensed dealer. So what they do is they're allowed to use the name, the logos, the products. They have to use their products. But other than that, they don't offer a ton of support, not by design, right? So they're as a franchisee, they're typically not paying a franchise fee or a royalty. Okay, so as a licensee, you're using their product, and there's a markup, I'm sure, and that's where the company is making its money. A true franchise, they're going to take a franchise fee and an ongoing royalty, and they're going to provide you a lot more support around training, marketing, operations, that sort of thing. But they're not typically making a markup on any product. So that's kind of there's nuances to that, but that's generally the difference.
Thank you.
So there's that list. And again, but what you'll find in here, there's a couple of you're like, what is that? And if you went down even further to the full list, because this is only the top, 20 or so, you're going to see the Dunkins and the Burger Kings and the Pizza Hut, Subway, because, they tend to have the most locations. But something like Supercuts franchise, Great Clips, a lot of the beauty concepts out there, or nail salon concepts, unless they're the local mom and pop, there's a lot of franchise concepts for those types of businesses. You see Snap-on there, it's a tool company, right? Not something you would think franchise. You see the trucks driving around, but you're like, oh, whatever, that's, maybe they're company owned or whatever. No. Maine's own Aroma Joe's, which is now starting to conquer the rest of the Northeast, is right in there, right? They're coming into Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and they're growing strongly. Ameriprise, that's, financial consultants, financial advisors for people's personal finance. So there's quite a bit of variety out there, even though it may not be represented on this because these are the top brands. But this is all in Maine right here, Maine specific.
Right, and who knew that Hampton Inn by Hilton was a franchise? Not me.
Yeah, that's a common one. All of the big hospitality business like Marriott, all of them have some company locations, but almost all of those brands are franchised. So now they're huge investments, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I never knew that either
until
I started doing this. So yeah, interesting. All right, that was interesting. This maybe not, but it's important. Right. So one of the things I talked about before is disclosure. It's one of the advantages in franchising. So what does that mean? So without boring you with a ton of history, I'll give you 30 seconds. Back in the early 70s, there was a whole bunch of state laws around franchise control, franchise law, because way back in the 40s and 50s, there were a lot of people starting to do this, franchising. But as was with anything, there were some unscrupulous folks, some shady characters. They were out there selling something that didn't really exist, right? They would sell you on a concept but really not support you. People lost a lot of money. It was the Wild West, so to speak. So, and some states tried to start to act. The federal government said, let's just make this, consistent across the whole country. So that's what they did. And out of that came legislation in, I think, 1972, and that created this document. called a franchise disclosure document. Every legally franchised concept in the United States must complete this thoroughly. There's strict guidelines, and attorneys up the to create this. And what it does is intended to protect the consumer, just like a prospectus would if you were going to buy a mutual fund. And it has to be updated every year. And the Federal Trade Commission is the agency in the federal government that has oversight to all of this. So that said, it is, I wouldn't call it highly regulated, but it's, it's not like the airline industry or something like that where there's safety involved, but it's fairly well regulated in terms of what has to be disclosed. So everybody can read, I won't belabor all of this, but the key points are the information you're going to get is who's running this franchise company, what's their business, what's their experience, how long have they been doing it, is the company ever filed for bankruptcy, has anybody sued them? All great stuff to want to know. I mean, if there's been 3 bankruptcies and 10 lawsuits, you probably should run for the hills, right? Stay away. So it's good to know. What's it going to cost me? Very detailed section in there, item 6, which talks about exactly what it takes to invest to open a location. Now, there's variability to that, right? Nothing's to the penny, but you're going to get a very good sense of, or a pretty tight range. And you can say, well, I can't afford that, or, oh, that's right in my range of investment. It's going to talk about what the royalty is, how it's paid, how much it is, very detailed, right? And a lot of this, you're going to want to know the top components of it, and there's a whole ton of legalese that you're like, oh, I can't read this. You get a franchise attorney to interpret that for you. But at least it's going to give you, the basic information across all these categories that you're going to want to know. What is my territory? How is that defined? What if I wanted to renew? What if I wanted to get out? All that sort of, it's going to define in very lengthy detail, all of that. One of the most important areas in this document and in franchising is something that's called validation. So that you are afforded a list of all of the current and prior franchisees in that document for this brand. And you're free to contact any of them. That's part of this. And in fact, we don't require anything, but we encourage it highly, right? Really talk to 6, 8, 10 people and validate everything you've heard to that date, whatever that is that you've been doing your research and diligence. And it's powerful to be able to talk to other owners, find out what their experience is. That's either going to give you some comfort about what you've already learned, or maybe that's another marker that says, this isn't for me. So really good disclosure. So that's the franchise disclosure document.
Hey, Dana, can I interrupt real quick for a question?
Please.
Would multi-level marketing businesses like Herbalife or Amway or LuLaRoe fall under that document? Would they have to answer any of those questions?
That's an awesome question, because just like the gal that asked the question about licensee, that's the multi-level marketing companies are absolutely not franchises. They get confused, they get lumped in there a lot of times, but those companies typically, they don't have a franchise disclosure document. They're not providing the level of support. They're not truly, I don't want to say that, and some of them are very good, don't get me wrong, but they're not a partner in that they're going to be there every step of the way and ongoing. The true multi-level marketing programs, whether they're Herbalife, jewelry, there's some very good ones. They're finding people that are going to sell their product. They take a cut, and that's pretty much it. They want you to be competent and all that, but you're there to grow the business very simply from a sales standpoint. You'll make your money, they'll take their cut, and that's kind of the extent of it.
I also want to add, I actually had a client this year come to me who was claiming that he wanted to buy a franchise, and it was a gentleman out of New York that was selling him this franchise. And I said, go find his FDD, get his franchise disclosure documents. You can see it's actually a franchise. And when he did that, it turned out that he wasn't. And so quickly turned things around for him. But the guy was a salesman and he was going to sell him this franchise. And it was, you know, it was really interesting because he thought it was, but it actually wasn't.
Yeah, the term franchise, unfortunately, sometimes gets misused, right?
Mhm.
Oh, just because I have 10 locations, I'm a franchise. No, you're a mini chain that one person owns. That's not a franchise.
Right.
And by the way, to franchise a business is not, you know, it's expensive. It's a process. You don't just say, oh, I'm a franchise and here's the document. Like, there's a lot of steps involved. Intentionally, right, to make sure that the people that are doing it, you know, have the capability, you know, just like the franchisor needs to be financially capable, right? They need to be.
And is it true in order to form a franchise, you have to have minimally 3 years of successful profitability? I mean, there's so much criteria in order to, I mean, that's another whole conversation about taking a business and having it be turn it into a franchise, right? That's another whole topic.
Could be another webinar.
Yeah, another webinar. People are interested, we'll do it. Yeah, for sure, because it's another whole animal in and of itself. Another question? Do we have another question?
Yeah, I guess the question is, does FRANNET help or deal with businesses that want to form a franchise? Is that part of your offering?
Yeah, great question. So I answer that twofold. So a lot of times people, you know, have a business, have an idea, whatever, they think, oh, I should franchise this. So I'll walk them through what they're really getting into and what they need to consider. And if they're even, you know, frankly capable. And if so, if that's true, then we have a couple of very strong companies that's all they do, right? They take a concept and they bring them through the entire process of making it become a franchise. It's not something somebody can do on their own. You need attorneys, you need, there's a lot of people that need to be involved in that. And there's companies that's exactly what they do. So no, we do not directly do that, but we can assist with just the right questions and then make good referrals to companies that could help them with that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's rattle through some myths, and you know, half of these are obvious, the other, you know, maybe not so. So it's only fast food retail. The list from we just saw a minute ago, where, you know, 80% of it was. But if it's not just the stuff you see driving around, the reality is there are, and I've mentioned this already more than once, thousands of franchised companies in probably 100 industries. This slide's a little dated. I think right now the IFA, which is the International Franchise Association, great group, by the way. A lot of good information from the IFA too. Over 1 million operating locations. So that's either physical locations, it's 13,000 McDonald's, right? Or territories. So Molly Maids has probably 400 territories. That's the residential cleaning people that come clean your house. So that's what I'm talking about when we say units. Over 1 million operating units nationally in franchising across all these different industries. So you can see, you know, it's not just business services, business to business. So, you know, digital marketing companies, executive and business coaches, certainly other bricks and mortar, you know, automotive, your Meinekes and Makos, those are all franchised. Again, personal care, you know, so whether it's hair, you know, beauty salons, all that sort of stuff. You know, gyms, certainly, you know, fitness is a big area. So, you know, here are some other examples. Anything, especially in the last couple of years with the dreaded pandemic, residential repair. My gosh, the number of companies in that space. There's a franchise for almost anything in your house. You want to fix your roof, there's a franchise for that. You want somebody to cut your lawn, there's a franchise for that. You want somebody to clean your pool? Yep. I could go on and on. Replace the floor, remodel a bathroom, anything around the home. And they're good businesses, generally speaking. It's a good category, especially these days. There's a lot of demand, and it's not a massive investment like a McDonald's with all that fixed equipment and, you know, ground leases and all that sort of thing. I mentioned fitness, beauty, damage restoration, right? So the people, God forbid, you have a water main break in your neighborhood, or again, a fire or something like that. Those are big businesses. And then the B2B, sign companies are also in that B2B, right? Big industry, signage. So just some thoughts. This is one of the ones you wouldn't think of. Oh, well, if I'm going to be in business, I want to own a company that has a tremendous, great product, the best product there is. That's, everybody wants to be part of what they do, and that's understandable that you'd want a high quality product. However, and I'm picking on McDonald's a little bit, if you and I had a cookout this weekend, most of us could probably produce a better hamburger. Let's face it. McDonald's is functional. It serves a purpose. It's convenient. It's affordable. All those sorts of things. So if it's not the best product, then why do franchises exist and excel and thrive? And it's because of some of the stuff we've already talked about. They provide tremendous support. McDonald's, after I picked on their product, I will laud them for their systems. I mean, the reason they're so wildly successful for 50 plus years is their expertise. They're great marketers. The training programs there are top world class, top notch. The number of, wealthy executives that started out working in a McDonald's as a cook or an assistant manager in training, is mind-boggling. So these people work their way up. So their training programs are top notch. They're excellent if it's a bricks and mortar concept at selecting the location, like real estate. They have all sorts of really robust, refined back office systems for accounting, human resources, all those things that any business needs. They don't realize they need it until they're in business, and they're like, oh boy, like I thought I was just going to be, selling something. Well, every business has all these other components to it. And a good franchise provides all of this support and expertise, especially in things that you don't outwardly think of as a potential owner.
Before you go to the next one, there's the question of the, over 3,000 different franchises. How many of those do you, or I would say FRANNET, represent?
So we're, if I could steal the mutual fund analogy again, we have a subset of that. So we work with about 300 of those companies. Now it seems like a too tiny a number, but we have an inventory that's intentionally built to represent almost every industry in there, right? So types of businesses, investment level, all the different industries, it's built out. So we typically have a concept for everybody's situation. So this idea that, you have to sell something or be in business with no competitors, which would be great, but that's really not reality in anything, right? There's nobody has a business, I don't think, that nobody else is doing it, right? That's kind of hard to find. And in reality, franchising actually has a counterintuitive approach to that. They oftentimes are okay with the competition because it proves in a particular trade area that there's demand for that product there. And then how they're going to succeed is by all the stuff that I just talked about with their support, and knowing that they can just take whatever market share they're going to pull out of that market and build multiple locations to build consolidation in an area. So it's not competition is not a bad thing. When I worked for Wendy's, one of the things we looked at, different traffic patterns and household income and all that when we decided on a location is, are the competitors there? And that was never viewed as a bad thing. That was actually a good thing. That meant the market was there. If we were 5 miles one way or the other, we may be the only one there, but guess what? We're the only one there, right? So there's nobody there to actually, consume the service or the product. So a little counterintuitive, but it kind of, when you think about it, it does make some sense. Another big one, everybody thinks this, right? They're super expensive, and they can be, and it's all relative. If you've got 50,000 to invest, 150 is a lot of money. If you've got 300,000 to invest, 150 is not, but $1 million is, right? So it all depends on your situation. But I think the idea that people think that it's all 750 to $1 million investment for a franchise is just not true. In fact, the 300 companies I mentioned, 65 to 70% of those are in the, call it 100 to 400,000 range on investment. So again, far more approachable than people typically think, but it's still a lot of money depending on, what your wherewithal is. But the point of all that is for people to know that you don't have to be a millionaire to become a multimillionaire, right? It's not like, you can't be involved in franchising if you don't have a 7-figure investment level. So what would that look like? One of many scenarios, right? But very typically, if you're going to invest $100,000, keep the numbers easy, $100,000, you're going to need some of your own money out of pocket. There's very few opportunities that, hey, I can finance 100% of it. Come into it with no money of my own at all. You're going to have to come up with a quarter to a third of that liquid, right? Cash. And then, there's other options for financing potentially with the Small Business Administration, other lenders. There's ways to finance the rest of it. And what would that look like potentially? Again, personal savings, yeah, obviously. The rich uncle, always a great thing, right? If you find that person, go for it. But home equity line of credit, I've had clients utilize the equity in their home to help fund the business. So maybe they already had $30,000 in a savings account earmarked for this. They needed more. Okay, maybe I can take a portion of the equity in my home. A securities-backed line of credit is just a fancy way of saying, I don't want to sell stocks and bonds that I might own that aren't in my 401k. Can I take a loan against that? Yep, I've had a client do that. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to sell those things, that triggers, taxes, right? And if you don't want to do that, you can use one of these credit lines. The one that people don't know much about is something called rollover for business startup. That's the last one. You can use a portion of your defined contribution plan, 401k, IRA. My wife's a teacher, so that's a 403b in her world. Any of those plans, you can take a portion of that, and if it's for the purpose of investing in a business, doesn't even have to be a franchise, right? If you're investing in a business, you can take that money out tax and penalty free. So if you're going to take 10 grand and go on vacation from your 401, the government's going to penalize you 10%, and then they're going to tax you at whatever your marginal tax rate is at that time to utilize that money. So oftentimes a third of it's gone. But if you're investing in a business, it's all yours. Now, the companies that do this will charge a fee, right? So there is some cost to it. No tax or penalty. So it's a good option for some people.
And I'll add, I did have an experience with a gentleman in Seattle when I was consulting there, and he did buy a cycle bar, which is similar to Soul Cycle franchise. And he used his 401k to do it. I'd
say if I went back and actually check, about half of my clients have used that. Mm-hmm. Some it's a bigger portion than others, right? If you had, never would recommend using a big chunk in your 401k, right? But if you're somebody that had 500,000 and you only needed 50, that's you're not risking your whole retirement. You're taking a calculated risk with a portion of it.
Right.
And these are the companies that the big three that do that know the legalities and the logistics. It is a process, but these are companies that we work with that we would introduce you to that can help with that. Another one of my favorites, and it's again counterintuitive. The more I invest, the more I make. Not necessarily. I worked for Panera Bread for a number of years. These people had massive investments, and yes, they made a lot of money, and they did very well. But they were already wealthy. Unfortunately, that's not for the startup people like me or you or the people here. But that doesn't mean that if you only invest $125,000 in a residential cleaning business, that you can't make many times more than that potentially than your investment. So I'm not making any guarantees or financial representation statements here, but suffice to say that, just because you invest more money doesn't mean you're going to make more. And the lower investment businesses, they can generate very healthy incomes over time.
Mm-hmm.
So just don't think that, I know I need to make this much, which means I need to invest, a certain amount, and I don't have that. Like, don't make that correlation. It's not a perfect one-to-one. And probably, except for the first one, probably the favorite one, that, if I'm going to own Meineke, I need to be a mechanic. If I'm going to own Great Clips, I need to know how to cut hair. That is not 90% of the time. The franchisor is not looking for people that have the specific skill of the service or business. They're looking for folks that have transferable skills from their background, managing people, hiring people, training people. They maybe are really good at marketing. Maybe they had a digital marketing background. Finance people obviously are really good with the numbers, so they can financially manage the business. All those are the skills that most franchisors are looking for. Fixing cars, replacing brakes, and cutting hair, you're going to hire people to do that, right? And so, should you have some general knowledge of it? Probably. Should you have an interest in it? Maybe. You're going to want to be proud of and not, hate the people you're dealing with every day, or, you should like the industry, but you don't need to be an expert in it. The company is going to provide that kind of training to you as an owner, to make you understand the skills and everything. They're looking for your background, your business background, typically. So again, talking a lot. We have answered some questions along the way, which is great. I will pause quickly if there's anything to catch up on.
So far, you've answered everything.
All right, home stretch. So all that said, again, very top level. There's a couple of, before I get into sort of the next steps for somebody as an individual, just so you know, there's a couple of different options in franchising, and there's a lot of in between here too. But there's two general models. One, you're an owner operator, right? You're in it every day. Doesn't mean you're cutting hair or fixing brakes, but you're working on the business every day. So it's basically a job replacement, right? You're not working in a corporate job. This is not your job. Owning and running the business. And then the other one is for folks that do still have a job and want to keep it. There are business models, specifically designed companies. Ann mentioned Cycle Bar. That's a good example. As an owner, you could be the person that is the general manager and is there every day and runs it. 90% of the Cycle Bar owners are what they call semi-absentee. They hire a manager.
He is, right.
There you go.
He definitely is.
They hire a manager who then hires the staff that runs the Cycle Bar, and he's the executive owner. Certainly has to be involved in it. He's managing that person. He's probably managing some of the marketing and keeping an eye on the finances. But, if that's 15, 20 hours a week or whatever it is, they can still maintain a full-time job. So, and then again, there's a lot of in between that you can go from one to the other sometimes, and there's some concepts that are a little bit more to one way or the other, but it just gives you an idea of the two main ways of being an owner in franchising. Owner operator or a semi-absentee executive model. So franchising, when done correctly, means you're with a good franchisor, you're in business for yourself. You're still owning it, right? You're the owner. You're running the business, but you've got a business model that's been vetted, built out, and you've got the franchisor, who is the parent company that's going to be helping you, and other franchisees. So you're not by yourself. You're not sort of out on an island with no support system and nobody to turn to. So if I'm thinking about this, on the call, like what would I do next? And I always like to start with going back to some of the stuff I've already said. Understand exactly what the business does. Cutting hair, fixing brakes, whatever the business does, its core purpose. Understand what that function is, what the business does, from what you as the owner are going to do in it. really key, because the last thing you want to be is thinking, oh, I want to own this business because I love baking and it's a bakery. And then 6 months later, I haven't baked one thing because I'm the owner and I've got to hire people. I've got to train them. I've got to do payroll. I've got to check in the inventory. Like, you need to be real clear on what your role is, because, you know, if you were passionate about baking and then never baked in your business, you might not like your business anymore, right? So it's really critical to understand where you're going to slot yourself into that business, how, you know, what your role is going to be. So that's the key first thing in my mind. Then you say, okay, you know, do a little bit of a self inventory. Why am I doing this? What are the key things that are important for me? Did I lose my job and it needs to replace income? Is it more I want to build? And these are things we talk about with clients and get into detail. Is this not necessarily just the immediate income replacement, but I want to build an equity in an asset that I can sell, you know, closer to retirement? Is it more about the family time? You know, I'm working for somebody else and I have no control. I need balance. We've heard of all these buzzwords, right? Work-life balance, those sorts of things. Independence. I get a lot of people that's just, you know, maybe they've made their money in their corporate world, their prior life. They just want to do something, and it's got to make money. In any business, you're not going to spend all this time and not make some money. But sometimes it's just, I want to have an impact on my community. I want to feel like good about what I'm doing because I hadn't in the last 10 years. So sometimes it's a little more of a softer reason. You know, again, these things are all going to be specific to each person. You know, figure out the core reasons that you want to do this. And that'll give you clarity about what it should be down the road. What kind of, you know, what business should it be? So that's the second step in my mind, just sort of why. And then what am I going to be able to bring to it? What are my, these are all things we help people with, by the way. What are my key skills? Again, if it's a sales business, sales heavy business development, and I've never done that, may not be a good fit, right? If I don't want to deal with customers every day, probably should stay away from something in retail. So assess the things that you're good at. Are you good at, you know, again, sales, marketing, business development, working with customers, operations? You know, people that are really good at operations, people make good restaurateurs, right? They know how to run a system repeatedly day in and day out. Or maybe it's just more, you know, I'm really great at hiring, hopefully not firing, but sometimes that happens, training and managing people. So more of the HR thing. So have an inventory of the transferable skills that you're going to bring to the business, because once you know that list, that helps match what are the businesses that are going to take advantage of my skills. That's going to make me successful. And then the last thing is, what is my every day going to look like? Am I going to a location, or am I in, you know, my home office? Am I wearing a suit, or have I got a polo shirt on? Is it a service business or a product? Is it a dirty business, you know, like cleaning drains? Zoom drain is a drain, no, not a pretty business, but everybody needs it and it's profitable. You know, is it part-time, full-time? All these characteristics about sort of your day in the life, right? What does the business actually look like that I'm going to go to every day? Number of employees is a big one. You know, a business coach has no employees. It's that person. Restaurant has 50 or whatever the number is. So, you know, have a sense of these. You know, sometimes the answer to a specific question around here is I don't know, which is fine. But, you know, if it's, you know, you don't want a lot of employees, there's some things that you know you don't want to do or you do want to do, that narrows it down again. It's a process of elimination. So that's an overview of a lot of different areas, you know, what franchising is, where it is not, some of the advantages around disclosure and some of those things, and then some things to think about next steps, you know, if you're considering it. What are you going to do in the business versus what the business does, what your skill set is, what you do, you know, do want to do, don't want to do. And then what does my everyday need to look like as an owner? Happy to answer any lingering final questions. Hopefully I could translate some of what I said, which might have not have been English.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dana. We don't have any questions right now, but if anybody has them, feel free to plug them into the chat. I do have a bit of construction going on outside my home, so I apologize for any additional noise right now. But I would love we're getting some thank yous in the chats. We'd love to hear one of your biggest takeaways from today. So what was something you learned today that you did not know this morning? I would say for me, it was the disclosure sheets with the government. That was actually very reassuring. I had no idea that existed. So I appreciated our business advisor, Chris Cole's question about multi-level marketing. I wouldn't know if I call them organizations, but.
Sorry, there is a question in the chat. Are franchise fees negotiable?
Wow, these are some awesome questions.
Yeah.
So the short answer is typically no. However, like anything, there are instances where there is movement. I would tell you that how most franchisors design that is, if it's a territory or even a location, if you commit to 3, so say a franchise fee is $50,000. I'm just going to use round numbers for one location. If you buy 3, there's a sliding scale, right? So there's almost like a discount built in. So 3 might be $110,000, as you know. So you get a sliding scale. You get a break the more you buy. So that's pretty common. So if 1 was 50, you'd think 3 would be 150. No, if you commit to 3 up front, they're going to give you a break on number 2 and number 3, essentially.
The royalty fees, Dana, you know, I usually see ranges of 5 to 7 to 8% of revenue. What do you see?
Yeah, so royalty, yeah, that's another 5 to 10%. 10 is way on the high end. And the devil is in the details, right? So when you look at that, and that's what's really critical about the franchise disclosure document, because they're going to detail every fee in their line item percentage. So what you'll often see is, oh, my royalty is 5%. And people think, okay, great. And then they get into business and they haven't looked at that and they realize that they have to pay $150 a month for a technology fee. They have to pay 1% into a local advertising fund, and they're paying 2% into a national advertising fund. And like, whoa, where did this come from? All that is detailed in that FDD. And you know, sometimes a franchisor will just have one fee that covers everything. Sometimes they break it out, like I just did. You know, 5%, 1%, 2%. So if somebody says my royalty is 5%, but hey, my competitors is 9%, you should go with me. Well, know what's really in there, right? Because it may end up being that 9% is better than the combined fees that they didn't tell you because you only asked about royalty. So
that's absolutely true. And I had that experience with a franchise situation in Seattle. So it is really important to know those details because, you know, once you've committed, you are now locked in, and you can't negotiate once you're locked in. It's kind of said and done. So you've got to really know what those expenses are going to be.
100%. And going back to the question about franchise fees being negotiable, typically that initial upfront franchise fee is not, very rarely. You know, some of the ones that are struggling probably will. Some of the ones that are maybe newer, that are trying to get critical mass, they may, you know, do discounts, you know, that they wouldn't. Think about it. If you're a big company that's got a lot of interest, Dunkin' Donuts is never going to discount their fee, right? Nobody's negotiating with them because everybody, you know, so many people in line wanting that business. So, you know, but I would tell you that sometimes the way you can negotiate a little bit is if you're paying $50,000 for a franchise fee and your territory is, they've defined your territory here, sometimes you can wiggle out of them a little bit more territory for what you're paying. So you could say, oh, you're going to guarantee me 300,000 households for my business. But if I look at a map, there's 50,000 people over here that you're never going to be able to sell because there's franchisees all around it. Why don't you just throw that in for me? And, that can happen. So maybe the fee doesn't change, but maybe you get a little bit more for it. I've seen that happen. So
one thing I also saw, which was very interesting, was the royalty fee was a percentage of the revenue, and they set expectations that you had to hit certain revenue markers every year going forward. And even if you didn't hit those, you still owed a certain amount. So that, again, it's really important to read the documents and know what's in there.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Some of them will, yeah. So two things. Some of them will have that, non-negotiable revenue, goal you need to hit, and the percentage stays the same. Others are a little softer. They'll say, okay, it's 7%, but a minimum of $1,500 a month if you don't hit whatever the number is. If you can't hit that, they're gonna have a flat fee minimum, right? That they're at least getting, and that may only be for 3 years, right? Or and then it expires. Right. A lot of companies will, for the first 6 months. This is another place you could potentially negotiate, depending on the environment and the franchise or the situation. Some of them offer the first 6 months royalty free in order for you to get up and running, cash flow positive, feeling good about it. So then in the next 9.5 years that we have you as a partner, you're generating more, making more, and we're all happy. Some of them offer that right up front, but that could be a way for somebody that doesn't to say, hey, you never know. You don't get what you don't ask for, right? So I have seen it where somebody has been bold enough to say, hey, why don't you give me the first X number of months, royalty free, and I'll sign this. And that's a way, because they have to be careful about having franchise agreements with different people that had all sorts of different scenarios, right? That opens them up to liability. Hey, you did this for this person. Why didn't you do it for me? It's supposed to be a standard agreement, right? So they got to be super careful about how they manage that. But there are ways like that. Give a discount potentially, on the first X number of months of royalty, but not switch out and give you a $10,000 discount on the franchise fee. So,
yeah, every situation is different.
Every situation is different, and you've already mentioned a couple of times. Frankly, the first time a client of mine typically should be spending any real significant money is if they get to the point where they're pretty serious about this concept. Like, I really want to do this. It's more of, unless I find something that tells me no, I'm going to do it. That's when you hire a franchise attorney, and that franchise attorney reads that document thoroughly and interprets it for you, does a whole bullet point. Hey, they're not going to change a whole lot on it. Some of it's negotiable. It's more of making sure you understand what it is you're reading. Because sometimes even reading the words, it's like, what? They're going to translate for you, and they're going to make sure that you know exactly what you're getting into.
And we do have some good Maine franchise, focused attorneys. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm sure Dana has his network of attorneys that are specific, because this is a very specific business model. So we're both here as resources. You're welcome to reach out to our contact information is right there. You're welcome to reach out to both of us anytime with additional questions, here to help you in any way. And we hope that this was informative for you. Let us know.
This was great from my perspective. I am going to launch one last poll just to get your final thoughts. I did get a couple of messages in the chat thanking you, saying this was extremely informative. Peggy had to leave early, but she said she didn't know that FRANNET had a rep in Maine. And so it sounds like you cover New England, but you happen to have a special place in your heart for Maine. And so sometimes you come here to help everyone. So looks like some people still have some questions. So feel free to plug those into the chat or respond to any of the emails you've gotten to me. I'll include everyone's contact information. But the final question I see right now is, if a franchise company fails, is the franchisor out of luck with the investment?
So let me make sure that, so if the franchisor, the parent company failed, or the franchisee, which way would we?
Well, this question asker is welcome to unmute themselves, but it seems like they're asking if the parent company fails.
Yeah, so that's great. Another great question. And that could go a number of different ways. I would say typically you're probably not going to recoup everything as a franchisee, typically. It also depends on the kind of the kind of bankruptcy they're in, right? If it's just reorg, you may be fine. If it's liquidation, unfortunately, you're probably in at least second, if not third position, right, in order of reimbursement for whatever's left. And that usually means you're out, right? Direct creditors, debt, if the company had a direct bank debt, they're going to be first in line. Yeah, so it's usually not a good answer, a good story. So that actually, again, these are all the things you can't point out in 45 minutes to an hour. One of the biggest things to do with any of this in your due diligence is the solvency, the financial position of the parent company, which is in that FDD, by the way. So how solid are they? Are they well capitalized? If you're talking about Fast Signs, one of my favorite companies, it's been in business 40 years, you probably don't have anything to worry about with regards to whether they're just going to suddenly go belly up, right? But still do the diligence. It's the more early adopter, they're very young, where, that could be a concern. And, we have some insight into that as well. I've seen, very young franchise companies that had, a very solid model, and they had experienced, wealthy, sometimes famous backers, right? So they were well positioned, even though you look at them and say, Jesus, they only have 5 locations. Yeah, but this is what they plan to do. Here are the people involved in it. Here's the backing. They have a massive, equity investment from XYZ and this person and that person. They're in it for the long haul. They're serious and they're reputable. So all part of that diligence.
And that makes sense from starting a small business perspective of like the success rate versus losing your investment. You want to make sure you're always doing your due diligence. So thank you so much, Dana. Thank you, Anne. Thank you everyone for joining us. I don't see any other questions, but feel free to email me or email Dana. I'll include Dana and Anne's contact information in my follow-up email, as well as the slides and the recording. So you'll have everything you need to get started or to continue on, so to speak. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you,
Thanks,
Kelsey.
Dan, Kelsey. Appreciate your partnership. It was awesome.
Great.
All right, bye now.
See you next time.